Hello, everybody. A lot has happened in the United States in 5 years or almost 5 years. Back in September 2020, I had a journalist, a Pulitzer Prize finalist journalist, Matthew Hongoltz-Hetling, on the show, talking about the backfiring of a libertarian experiment. Back then, Matt had a new book out, A Libertarian Walks into a Bear. It was a book that has done extremely well. It has over 1,000 positive reviews on Amazon. 5 years later, it seems, though, the libertarians are everywhere. They haven't just walked into a bear, they've walked into government. RFK Jr. now is in charge of health and human services, and indeed the American population seems to be increasingly defined by RFK Jr.'s libertarianism. There was a New York Times piece a couple of days ago about mad moms in Texas chipping away at vaccine mandates. And even the MAGA people seem a little awkward and uncomfortable around RFK's Make America Healthy Again loonies. And appropriately enough, our friend Matt Hongoltz-Hetling is back again. He has a new book out, The Ghost Lab, how Bigfoot monsters, Bigfoot hunters, mediums, and alien enthusiasts are wrecking science. When Matt talked to us back in September of 2020, he was talking from a car in New Hampshire, and now he's talking from a car on the border of Vermont and New Hampshire. Matt, apart from the interior of your car, a lot's changed in the last 500 years. Not 500, whoops. All this craziness has made me mad. A lot has changed in the last 5 years.
That is certainly true. Thank you so much, Andrew, for having me on. Yeah, I'm talking to you from a car again, but I can promise you that I have left during the intervening 5 years. I haven't been stuck here the whole time. I hope
not. I hope you at least had a shower and something to eat.
Yeah, there's a shower in the back. But yeah, no, it's absolutely great that you sort of like set up the conversation in that way, because I think then, there was a time when libertarians were sort of like gettable for progressives as a political asset.
Well, they were just kind of weirdos. We didn't take them particularly. I mean, we took them seriously, but your book, A Libertarian Walks into a Bear, is about this libertarian takeover of a small town in New Hampshire. And we thought of it as weird, but now they're running the show, Matt, aren't they?
That's absolutely the case. Yeah. And sort of like the through line that allowed them to do that was the pandemic, which was not really, it was just sort of like gearing up when you and I spoke last. And, a lot of Republicans were sort of like looking to express their sort of opposition to public health agencies at the time. And libertarians had sort of staked out this message of medical freedom and defined it in a way that was both appealing to more mainstream Republicans and dangerous to institutions and the rest of us.
Yeah, and you've had a book in between these two. If it sounds like a quack, a journey to the fringes of American medicine, that also did very well. It came out in 2023. You just had a piece, actually, a very moving piece in the New York Times, the story of a woman called Dawn Callie who died of cancer and got sucked into this movement. So we can laugh about it, you and I, Matt, but there's a tragic element to all this, isn't there?
There absolutely is. There are, human costs. There are costs in human lives. There are costs in quality of life. And all of these sort of like projects that I've taken on have been about sort of like, these fringe groups who have set themselves against institutions, be it libertarians, be it fringe alternative medicine practitioners, and sort of how society as a whole, or maybe progressives within society in particular, have lost their grip and their influence with these groups, only to see them grow to become, juggernauts that are driving public policy and that are now taking a wrecking ball to our evidence-based institutions. And sort of like that leads me to the next group in my current book, which is another group that we've not yet lost.
Bigfoot
one that is
hunters,
sort of
mediums,
gettable.
and alien enthusiasts.
Exactly right. And they are on their surface as laughable, as bizarre and colorful as the other folks that we just touched on. But there are some real important dynamics that are at play. More and more in America, people who are hearing perhaps voices in their head, or people who are having persistent feelings of unease at home, are, instead of going to their therapists and their psychologists, turning to ghost hunters and psychic mediums to sort of explain their condition. And they're getting a very different answer than they would if they went into evidence-based practitioners. And people
Matt, I want to get into your experience of Bigfoot hunters, mediums, and alien enthusiasts in a second. But stepping back from all this, has America, excuse me, has America in all this just gone mad? I mean, we can come up with all sorts of sophisticated sociological and economic and cultural explanations. But to me, this is just a form of madness.
I think it's more narrow than madness. I would call it sort of like the root cause of all of this. The driving motivation and the commonality between all of these different sort of wrecking ball movements is that they do not trust institutions. They don't trust science. They don't trust government. They don't trust even a collective dogma like church.
Yeah, you just
they don't trust college.
Podcast that I was listening to on this massive crisis of trust.
Yes, absolutely. It's a massive crisis of trust. That's exactly the way to think of it. And that leads people to go into place, to sort of like take positions that are destructive, right? If you don't trust on a fundamental level the science and the institutions, that makes you ripe for the pickings for a conspiracy theory that might cause sickness to spread. It leaves you ripe for the picking for a conspiracy theory that causes you to turn away from a college education and sort of be suspicious of all of these other things.
You talk about a college education. Are you suggesting that a lot of the people that you're covering in the Ghost Lab are themselves college educated? They have four-year degrees?
Some of them are. It's a movement that doesn't really hew closely to any particular demographic, sort of like the medical freedom movement. That was part of what made that so powerful, was that it had its fingers in so many different communities. And belief in ghosts, belief in Bigfoot, belief in the Loch Ness Monster, and belief in the idea of aliens walking among us. These are very, very widespread, very pervasive beliefs. A majority of Americans believes in has some sort of supernatural belief. And I would even say that it's sort of human nature to believe in these things more so than it is human nature to believe in science. I think we believe in science sort of like despite our human nature, not because of it.
Is this, Matt, in an odd way, a kind of secularized religion? We don't laugh when we hear people believe in the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. We don't laugh when we hear that people believe in life after death. Is this any more absurd than the kind of preaching one might hear in a church on a Sunday?
What distinguishes them is not sort of like the level of absurdity, for exactly the reason that you just mentioned. The difference is in sort of the fragmentation and the level of individuality of the belief. So if you go to church, there are gatekeepers at the top who are sort of guarding knowledge, stewarding an agreed upon body of information and knowledge and morals and codes of conduct, and binding communities together. What's really different about the paranormal enthusiast community is that what is valued is not the collective fact. What is valued is the personal experience. And even if these personal experiences are wildly at odds with one another, they can hold those beliefs to be true at the same time, even if they contradict one contradicts the other.
Is there a tradition, though, in American, if this is the right word, intellectual history or spiritual history? The 19th century was full of these kinds of movements, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The spiritual movement first took off in America in the 1850s, and this was because a pair of sisters started spirit rapping in a very convincing manner, in a way that fooled a lot of people. And it made sense for women to start identifying as having the power to communicate with spirits, because they were in such a sort of poor place in our society. They were such second-class citizens that this was a sort of empowering move for them to become a psychic medium. Now, it made no difference when those sisters, the Fox sisters, disavowed their initial claims and demonstrated that they could make those spirit rappings by cracking their toes. Instead, the train of spiritualism just sort of kept moving forward in the face of all evidence. And so I think, historically it has come and gone as the times have changed. We're coming out of a period of great belief and faith in institutions and science. Perhaps the anomaly is the last 50 to 80 years, during which science and institutions have really asserted control of a lot of spheres of our life. And now that control is being threatened by a belief system that is very fragmented, very diverse, very individualistic, and that's represented by these sort of paranormal beliefs.
Matt, you date a lot of this back to COVID, to 2020, March in 2020. We talked 6 months after that. Back in 2007, I wrote a book called Cult of the Amateur, which was one of the first books, I think, to address the fragmentation of authority bound up with the digital revolution. How much of this is associated with the internet, of people going online and finding the weirdest kind of stuff which they can believe in?
Yeah, I'm aware of your thesis on that, and I think that this dovetails with it absolutely perfectly. The problem that institutions and scientists face is twofold. One, it's sort of like actual flaws and inadequate provision of services to make people feel safe and comfortable, that leaves them grasping at straws for other explanations. But two is the way that the digital bubbles in which we wrap ourselves can so severely warp and distort our perceptions. So they've allowed people with very individualistic beliefs to sort of make contact with one another and herd up and reinforce and drive to ever more radical places the things that they're saying. And it's also sort of muted or distorted the actual news that's coming from more reliable news sources.
Is it any coincidence, Matt? I don't want to turn this into another show about Donald Trump, because we're all bored by him already. He's a particularly boring sort of fellow. But having said that, given the relatively open war that he's declared on science, on the NIH, on universities, is it any coincidence that your work, your observations about the breakdown of trust and the mainstreaming of theories on alien existences and mediums is happening at a time of government which itself in many ways seems to reject the authority of science? What comes first? What is causing what?
Well, the decline of trust predates the ascension of Donald Trump. I see him as an expression of that public distrust. He's, he's got populist support, right? His power came from the people. It didn't come from his immense wealth and privilege and status. And if you look at sort of like global indicators of trust, they've been declining and declining and declining for years and years and years. New Hampshire has been on the leading edge of that trend, which is part of the reason why I explored those dynamics.
Live free or die. As we said before we went live, I actually lived in New Hampshire in 1991 to 2. It's always been a strong home of libertarianism.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's always been a place where individuals can express themselves more fully, and a place where collectivists are viewed with more hostility and suspicion. But it would be one thing if it was just trust in government that was fading, but every institution is losing trust. So you can't just say it's a flawed government, because colleges and churches and all these other things are also losing confidence from the public. And the sad news for institutionalists is that they need to make dramatic changes, or they risk becoming irrelevant. And we're sort of moving into a new age, and that new age is not particularly friendly to our institutions in their current form.
So the people you've studied for this book and the movements you've studied, the Ghost Lab, you said that they don't necessarily conform to a particular class or socioeconomic group. What generalizations can one make about people who believe in the existence of Bigfoot and mediums and aliens?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of sort of efforts within academic circles to hang the idea of like a mental illness on them, to sort of like find those associations. And those have by and large not been borne out, those suspicions. What they find is that these are people who, if you had to characterize one of them, it would be sort of like an Earth Mother vibe, right? There's a sort of...
So it's the Texas Mad Moms who you also covered in Vaccine Mandate.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's people who are sort of like communing directly with nature, a lot of them. It's people who are suspicious of their neighbors, maybe a little more happy with solitude. And it's people who, that fundamental issue of distrust does animate a lot of them. It's sort of like this gateway thing. What happens is, Andrew, is you have a personal experience. You think you're getting messages from your recently departed loved one, which is completely understandable for someone who's living with grief. And then you start to reach out into the internet and into the world, and you find out that a lot of other people have these experiences. So now you're absolutely convinced that this is not a figment of your imagination, but that it's correct. And then you're sort of forced to wonder, why isn't science able to document any of this? Why are the scientists sneering at these ideas? Why are they just dismissing and debunking? And you're forced to conclude that either science has a huge blind spot, or that science is sort of actively corrupt and is dedicated to hiding the truth rather than uncovering the truth.
So it's a conspiracy. I mean, it's a mix of the two.
Yeah, and it's not a conspiracy in and of itself.
That the NIH is dominated by Harvard and Princeton scientists who don't share the interests or values of ordinary Americans.
And in the more extreme tellings, those institutions are masks for populations of lizard men or aliens or what have you. So they're not necessarily conspiracy theories in and of themselves, but they just provide very, very ripe, fertile ground for conspiracy theories to sort of loom up and take over and spiral out of control. Because those...
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, because they're not stakeholders in our society. They don't have the same interest in maintaining some of these services because the people who provide those services consider their worldview to be absolutely ridiculous, rather than extending them some measure of respect as we might afford to a culture that we didn't agree with, or a religious view.
Yeah, and one wonders whether that would only encourage them more. Matt, does this? I know that in health terms it matters a lot. Your book on the fringes of American medicine is a warning. The piece you just ran in the New York Times, the story of one woman who fell prey to the medical freedom movement, is very troubling. It's a tragic story. But does this really matter? I mean, who cares that people actually believe in, and I don't mean this to undermine your book, because I think it's an important book,
Mm-hmm.
but should we care that people believe in Bigfoot hunters, mediums, and alien enthusiasts? Does this really do any harm to America if people are imagining that you or I are actually an alien, and that, you know, we're looking at your car? The more we talk about this, the more I expect that some alien is going to come out from behind you in a second.
Yeah, I should have set that up. The beliefs in and of themselves are not necessarily harmful. But let me tell you what happened in New Hampshire. So New Hampshire, as I said, is on the leading edge. They're a little bit further along this path towards distrust and anti-institutionalism and paranormal beliefs than America as a whole. New Hampshire has always funded its public university system at a lower per capita rate than any other state in the union, significantly lower. And that was true in 2005. That was true in 2010. In 2012, the state legislature voted to cut its funding for its public university system by an additional 50%. So what happens is our public university system in New Hampshire is still there, but it's just, pardon the pun, a ghost of its former self. It is a hollow shell. It's in dire financial straits. And when it gets to that point, it's forced to make compromises with the way that it educates its students and the way that it sort of tries to attract funding from other sources. And in New Hampshire, the attendance rate for colleges and for public schools is in the toilet. So what it does is it sort of sets the stage for people who are uneducated in sort of like the ways of science, uninterested in cultivating those systems of thought, and as a result, the systems of thought that provide for us all are weakened.
Is that true? I mean, the fact that I take your point on the hollowing out of public education in New Hampshire, so the state schools have fewer and fewer resources. But you're still not really answering my question, Matthew. So what if a larger minority, I hope it's a minority, of new people in New Hampshire believe in the existence of aliens?
I think it might actually be a majority.
Well, a majority of people in New Hampshire.
Yes. Well, what happens is that
you're saying a belief that the majority of people in New Hampshire believe in the existence of aliens.
Yes,
I mean, it's one thing to believe in the existence of life forms on other planets or other universes, but the existence of what aliens amongst us right now, is that?
I don't know that the surveys have put it to too fine a point.
Little green men, in other words. It's probably no coincidence that your new book, The Ghost Lab, is all green.
That's right. The finer points of the depth of their alien beliefs, I don't know. But I will say that there is a pervasive belief that government knows more about aliens than it is telling the people, right? This is like a common vector for those conspiracy theories. I also know of many, many people who identify as having been abducted by aliens, who are opting out of medical services because the medical services are administered on the basis of a belief that their experiences are delusions, which, to be clear, I recognize that they probably are. But that creates sort of like an unappealing disconnect. And you're asking, really, your question is, can institutions survive without public support?
No. My question is simpler than that, Matt. Does it really matter? Who cares? There was a time where most Americans believed in God. It's very hard to prove the existence of God. More than hard. It's obviously impossible. We didn't take exception to that. It didn't seem to be that troubling. What's really the difference believing in these weird little green men or mediums or Bigfoot hunters and believing in God? So what? So people got to believe in something. They may not believe in government. They may not believe in their family, their community. So let them believe in little green men.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is that, again, that it is not a collective belief. Church brings people together. Paranormal ideas, because they're based so wholly on the individual experience, that they prize an individual experience above a shared reality, drives people apart. And, we mentioned the devastating impact of these cuts to our medical research funding. This is sort of an expression of that. So I really think that while the belief itself is fairly innocuous, the sort of baggage that comes along with it and the way that society responds to it currently creates a dynamic that is very poisonous and very toxic to our ability to maintain our way of life.
Yeah, and it's all bound up, obviously, with loneliness, the breakdown of community, the lack of sociability, the fact that people talk to one another less and less, the disappearance of public space. So it's all part of a broader argument. Let's get to the Ghost Lab itself. It's about something called the KIT Research Initiative. Tell me about this, Matt.
Yeah. This was a really interesting story. So Andy Kitt is a very sort of like interesting guy. He's a no nonsense. Prides himself on being a straight talker.
Yeah, I looked him up. He's even on LinkedIn. I didn't find his photo, but he's on there.
Yeah. You'll also find him on the University of New Hampshire website, but where he is a PhD student on the cusp of becoming a professor. But he had this, he prides himself on his scientific credentials or his scientific mode of thoughts. He, in the wake of the death of his father, had some powerful personal experiences and decided to sort of take up this noble quest to inject science into the study of these paranormal fields. And he assembled a team of sort of like colorful people.
And this is the key. This is called the KIT Research Initiative.
Exactly right. The KIT Research Initiative. And this group, which included sort of like a representation of a lot of these most common beliefs, alien abduction, and psychic mediums and empaths, they all came together to try to bring science to the field, the fields in which they held interests and stakes. And they tried this for 9 or 10 years, and my book sort of charts the course of those 9 or 10 years, and sort of illustrates how those fairly innocuous beliefs eventually came to collide with the very notion of science and led some of them to a place where they were sort of forced to abandon the quest because it wasn't it became unimportant relative to some of these other goals that they had in terms of being inclusive, honoring all experiences, maintaining a self-identity that hinged on the ability to speak with spirits, perhaps, and that allowed some of them to sort of like avoid confronting perhaps the baseline conditions that caused them to believe that they'd been abducted by aliens multiple times.
But Matt, in a way, doesn't this suggest that these people believe in science, in that the KIT Research Initiative was attempting to get scientific proof for paranormal sightings. So it suggests that they still, for all the lack of trust that you talk about, they still believe in the idea of science. It's just they want the merging of these two worlds, of the paranormal world, of the alien world, and the scientific world.
Yeah, science still has a lot of cultural cachet, right? And so a lot of, I don't know if there's any paranormal enthusiasts that would not welcome some sort of an affirmation from some respected scientific institutions. But there's also a deep division within the community where some of them identify purely as sort of paranormal scientists. You know, we look at the TV shows, the ghost hunters and that sort of thing, and they're speaking in the language of science. They're doing investigations, and they are, you know, using scientific equipment to try to collect evidence. You know, that this is all sort of like the language of science. But that wing is in serious tension with a broader wing that is not particularly concerned with the science, that is instead talking about sort of like opening the mind to a different way to interpret the universe. And the desire to find some sort of scientific affirmation is one of the reasons why I think that these folks are gettable, and that their energy and their beliefs can be harnessed in a way that would actually benefit society and could allow institutions to maintain viability. And if we do not act on that, then I fear that our institutions will become increasingly irrelevant.
Well, let's end with that choice, as you put it, Matt, between either acknowledging, and correct me if I'm wrong, either the sort of the credibility of some of these beliefs and incorporating it into science, or just dismissing it entirely and conforming to their idea of coastal scientific elites, dismissing anything that they don't want to hear. How would that actually happen?
There's a variety of ways. A clinical setting can devise protocols so that they can treat people with these experiences in ways that make sense to the people as a practical matter. You know, in the Muslim world,
people, you mean as if they're ill or mad?
Well, treat those people who are experiencing symptoms of mental disease in ways that don't ridicule the beliefs that are the expression of those mental problems. If I'm having anxiety all the time and I think it's a ghost, and I go to my therapist should speak to me in the metaphor that I am experiencing a ghost, and they should have protocols in place and be prepared to do so. I think we should license mediums and psychics. There are 80,000 practicing psychics in our country, and they all have followers, and they all have people turning to them for advice, and that puts them in a position of power that is completely unregulated by the system. And in fact, you know, that the system has sort of like put those 80,000 professional psychics on the outside. They need to be welcomed into the fold and to be given a stake in society. Our colleges.
It's an interesting idea. I'll let you finish in a second, but
yeah,
where do you stop here? I mean, you're suggesting that psychics should be licensed as if they were what, doctors or therapists?
Well, like in the state of Nevada, for example, there's a state certified board of homeopathic practitioners. Homeopathy is ridiculous. It's bunk. And if you Google it and you see that its founding precepts are, what one of them is that an ingredient that's diluted gains power through dilution, you'll see just how sort of like nonsensical it is. But the state maintains this board, which allows them to hold those homeopaths accountable for harming society, whether by abusing their power relationship with their patients and the people that they treat, by failing to refer people with serious physical illnesses to medical professionals, by acting unethically. And that system, I think, is a good example of a way to sort of give them a half embrace that allows them to do what they do and that gets some buy-in from them. I get, Andrew, that it is a unpleasant sort of like drastic step to consider. I came to it only very, very reluctantly because it feels like capitulation to dark forces and supernatural thinking. But I think that it is a practical strategy that can give us and the services and medical funding and research funding that we need the best possible chance of moving forward.
How likely, finally, Matt, is it that we began this show talking about RFK and this libertarian takeover of the Health and Human Services piece of government, and Kennedy is energizing Texas mad moms to reject vaccine mandates. In the way you're thinking, how likely is it in the next 10 or 15 years that we'll have secretaries of psychic experiences, secretaries of alien abductions? I mean, you're laughing now slightly nervously, but 10 years ago, we could never have imagined RFK running Health and Human Services. How much of a slippery slope is this?
Yeah, I think I hate to make slippery slope arguments because they sort of like lead one to, forego what's actually in front of you. But I will say that I think that the power that they gain will not necessarily be in the halls of government, but that you see them winning battles for the minds of influential people who are making other sorts of impactful decisions in society, like those folks who are in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley's thought leaders are awash in spiritualism and New Age thinking.
And belief in alien existence. I mean, Musk and seems to believe in that aspect, at least, of the ghost law.
And they're making the algorithms and sort of building the world that is leading the rest of us by the nose into the future. And so that is one way in which this could really, in 10 years, dramatically impact us. And, Ross Douthat from the New York Times, he's posited, and others have posited, that this is sort of an emerging religion, New Age thinking, in 50 years, may be the dominant religion in the United States. And part of what makes it such a potent appeal for people is that it tells people that they are special by dint of their personal experience. And that is also what makes it so difficult to harness and corral for societal good.
Yeah, it might be his way of bringing religion in the back door or somehow proving the unprovable existence of God. So we got to end, Matt, but let's see if there are really any green men, any aliens or Bigfoot people or mediums behind you in your car in New Hampshire late afternoon. So this is your opportunity, aliens. Come out from behind Matt. Otherwise, we are going to conclude by assuming, like coastal elites, that there are no alien abductors around us. So let's see if they come out. They're coming out, Matt?
We've given them an adequate warning, and they have not come out.
Yeah, I think this was a very good scientific experiment. We know now there are no more aliens. That's the end of it. Matt, congratulations on the new book, The Ghost Lab. I think it's going to have the same kind of success as your other books. It's an important subject. It's hard to take seriously, but you do take it seriously, which I think is so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate the voice that you provide.